Congrats. Way to go. Keep it going. Good job, guys. All right, Paul. I see you. All right, John. Finish on. Coach Carl.
Great job, guys.
Hey there, it's Coach Curl here, and welcome to episode 205 of the Today's Leader podcast. Today it's my pleasure to bring you Scott Shay as our special guest. Now, Scott is a leading businessman, thought leader, and he's an author of 2 widely read books. Now, Scott co-founded the Signature Bank in 2001. Now, the bank has become one of the best banks in New York for private business owners. Now, it's been dubbed New York's most successful bank by Crain's New York Business. It was ranked the best business bank, the best private bank, and the best attorney escrow services, which was provided by the readers of the New York Law Journal in the 2008 publication. It was also awarded second place in that same journal in the best private bank category. Now, in 2015, Forbes ranked the bank as number 1 in its America's Best and Worst Banks evaluation. Now, Forbes' 2016 ranking of it as number 6 marked the 6th consecutive year that the bank was amongst the Forbes top 10. So it's been an incredible success story, and Scott was one of the founders of the business, of which they started from scratch. Now, Scott is also a published author. His second book, In Good Faith, Questioning Religion and Atheism, has been recognized as one of the best books of 2018 by Mosaic Authors and earned a finalist award from National Jewish Books. Now, this conversation was an enthralling one, as Scott shared stories of his father, who was a Holocaust survivor, who made a life in America. He shares his golden rule and how his book, In Good Faith, builds connections with people of faith and atheists alike. There was so much to take away from this conversation, and after a short break, it's my pleasure to bring you Scott Shay.
The Coach Curl podcast is brought to you by Think Grow Business, the home of the Think Grow Business Mastermind. If you're serious about growing your business, get serious and join a mastermind group today. Find out more at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au.
It's my pleasure to introduce Scott Shay to the Today's Leader podcast. Welcome, Scott. How are you?
Great to be here, Tony. Thank you for having me.
And sitting there at 5 p.m. New York time, and we're starting the day here in Brisbane in a chilly, I think we're 6 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure how that equates in Fahrenheit, but it's quite chilly here this morning. So, and you were just saying that you've been to Queensland. You love Queensland?
I love Queensland. I went, first I went to Sydney, then into the Blue Mountains, then worked my way up to Queensland.
Yeah.
Brisbane, of course.
Yeah.
And went to Heron Island. So I loved it. And as I was telling you, my wife was wondering, just why are we leaving here? Why are we going back to New York?
Absolutely. It sounds like you've got a great tour. Some of those iconic places, the Blue Mountains, and Heron Island's just special, right on the Great Barrier Reef there, and just amazing. So tell me, like Scott, you've had quite a career. You founded the Signature Bank. You've written some books. So briefly for my listeners, tell me the Scott Shay story.
Well, I started out, I'm a first-generation American in that, and I'm also the first person on either side of my family to go to college. Yeah. My father was a Holocaust survivor. He arrived in the United States with literally nothing but the clothes on his back and a few things in his parcel. And he built a life, and I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment that I lived in the dining room. My parents had the bedroom, and my mother's brother, for many years after he finished service in the Army, lived in the living room. So I didn't grow up with the expectation that I was going to found a bank, be chairman of a $50+ billion U.S. bank.
Wow.
So it's been quite a story. I worked hard, decided I wanted to go to college, and went to college, business school, went to Wall Street, worked for a place called Salomon Brothers. If any of your listeners have heard of Liar's Poker, I was there in those days. And then I went to work in private equity and had this crazy idea that New York needed a new bank. So we started, I had this idea of starting a bank from scratch and convinced two other gentlemen to start the bank with me. And we started totally from scratch. And that's definitely a story in and of itself.
Absolutely. And you've certainly got some awards. I'm just looking at my second screen here. You've been dubbed the best business bank, the best private bank, New York's most successful bank. So what stood you out? What enabled Signature Bank to start a business and become successful? I think I also read you're in like the top 40 banks in the US.
We are. We were the 6,500th largest bank, and today we're 40th or so, 30 in the high 30s for it, depending on what ranking you subscribe to. But if you really want to know the secret, I'll tell you, it's not because we're very proud of it, but it's very hard to do. First of all, I was insistent upon starting the bank from scratch. So my two partners and our capital source really wanted us to buy. They'd freely admit that today. They really want us to buy a small bank and grow that. And I insisted, no. I don't want to buy a bank and build it up because you only get one chance to build a culture yourself. And so we started this bank literally from scratch. We applied. We were in a room that's less than my home office, and we had 5 people in it. And we had a whiteboard, and we essentially started the bank from scratch. Here's what we're going to do. And that's a tremendous gift because A, there's nobody to blame anything on. B, most people don't start banks. So we had a blank slate. We could use technology in ways that we could never have imagined. And we've always been in a funny kind of way, we've been a technology leader. And by really picking every single colleague, every single employee. I mean, when in the first years, if you wanted to be an employee at Signature Bank, it was almost like getting married. I mean, you would meet so many people because I had this view that particularly in the beginning, you can never recover from a hiring mistake. And so we were super duper careful about the first people. And I knew every single person by name, what their story was. And we took the money from Bank of Pauline, which provided us $50 million in capital. That's all we had. They gave us no customers, no leads, no nothing. And we opened up our doors, and we were losing at the first months over $2 million a month, 2.2, 2.3 million a month. But we had a plan. We broke even after 21 months. We went public after 34 months, which is like warp speed for a bank. And we've never done an acquisition ever. So every client we have has walked in the door and said, I want to be a client of the bank. And today we're more than a $50 billion bank US. The secret to it was the culture. And this is a saying that I have, the most important thing in banking is knowing you're not a genius. It's just avoiding the stupid stuff. And so when 2008 came, we were the only bank in the United States above a certain size, above a pretty low size, that had no down year. We made more money in 08 than 09, more money in 08 than 07, more money in 08. We made more money in 08 than 07, more money in 09 than 08, et cetera, on the way up. I hope I got that right, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
And it's because I had this rule, which you can ask people about at the bank, which is the depositor golden rule. Never make a loan you would be embarrassed to show to a depositor. Don't try to be a genius. Don't be expecting you know better than your depositors. You're going to figure it out. This is complicated, but don't worry, we've got this. Just don't make a complicated loan. And so during that time frame, we never really had a problem loan portfolio because we always put ourselves in the thought process of how would a depositor feel about this, and always treating other people the way we would want to be treated ourselves.
Excellent.
That's really the secret sauce.
So no legacy. You were very conscious of the people that you were bringing into your business. Obviously, no baggage. When we acquire businesses, and there's always baggage. There's always baggage that comes along with the business. So that fundamental greenfield approach, both from a team and a business perspective, has certainly worked for you. So
yes,
congratulations. Where did the crazy idea of starting a bank come from?
So in the 90s, and your listeners in Australia may not know this, but there were a lot of banks in New York. There was Chemical, there was Manufacturers Hanover, there was Chase, there was JP Morgan, there was Trust Company of Westchester, Greater New York Savings. I could go on and on. There were about 19 banks that ultimately became JP Morgan Chase.
Yeah.
And I realized that the big banks were okay at servicing. They were pretty good at servicing the huge companies of the world, the AT&Ts, the Verizons, the IBMs, PepsiCos, all the household names. And they were also good and had the money to spend for mass market retail.
Yeah.
But I realized in my travelings that there was this whole group in the middle who really they were businesses, and they needed a $5 million loan. They were owned by an entrepreneur if this entrepreneur was being treated like another person walking into the branch, and he or she needed more than that.
Yeah.
And I thought if we could start a bank that would solely focus on that middle market, we'd have a niche that the others might ignore. And the truth of the matter is, when we first opened, they did ignore us.
Yeah.
We were taking clients. Our average loan size when we started was maybe $3-4 million. Our average loan size now is about $5 million. It's not that much different. We're still handling middle market clients. Of course, the big banks don't ignore us anymore.
Yeah.
We've gotten enough to annoy them. We've gotten big enough to annoy them.
Yeah.
But those folks, once we get those clients, the other secret to our growth is we rarely lose a client. So we're accumulating clients at a certain level, but we're not treating clients. So it just grows. I mean, we rarely lose a client.
Yeah. That's a great success story, and it's something that businesses right around the world can take some tips or some advice or take some key takeaways away. Culture, customer service, the pride in what it is that you do. It's all evident in the story. So when I think about the leaders for today, and I look at people that are making a difference, and obviously someone like yourself with the Signature Bank has made a difference. Who's inspired you in your leadership journey?
Well, I think what you're saying is very important, and I just want to start with that, which is making a difference.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I'm really proud of that we've become for New York, part of the fabric of New York.
Yeah.
All of these middle market companies, all of these small businesses. I mean, I love it when I see we made a loan, we helped the client, and then they've hired people, they built a business, they've grown, they've prospered.
Yeah.
So I think being mission driven is really, really important. And look, I can't say, I mean, my biggest hero is my father, frankly, who he left, this may sound strange, but I mean, my father was liberated from Dachau 75 years ago.
Yeah.
And he was less than 70 pounds.
Yeah.
He had 4 years of essentially being a slave.
Yeah.
And he rebuilt his life.
Yeah.
And so when you have that as would say legacy. It's not my legacy, but you have that as a role model of someone who took nothing and made a life.
Yeah.
I have business, people I look up to in the business world, but they all essentially have that same sort of a ratio algebra where they built their business or they built something from nothing. And maybe, psychologically, that's why I wanted to start something from scratch, that could be. You just start it, make it what you want to be. Start your life. Look at your life as a startup.
Yeah.
Not as something where you're catching someone else's coattails. And so that's been with me for my entire life.
Yeah. So you're a witness to a great journey and a great man. So that's once again just a great story. And that concept of starting up, anyone can start up on any given day. If you're unhappy with where you are or unhappy with the circumstances, maybe if they treat each day like that startup approach, we might see a little bit more of the people starting to grasp with the potential and the talents that they've actually got and start moving towards something that they really want to be doing. So when we think about great leaders and great leaders in the past, and we're seeing a little bit of this, and I don't really want to talk about it, but we're seeing a little bit of the toppling of history and great leaders, and we're starting to see a movement to redefine great leaders in the past. But when I look back at great leaders in the past and I think about some of the traits that they had, are they the same leaders that we need for the leaders of today?
So I think, and it's something actually I wrote about a little in my book, is so the greatest leader in the Bible was Moses. Yeah. And what is the one compliment he gets he gets two really big compliments in the Bible. One is he is the most humble man. And that's not to say that he didn't know what his traits, his good traits were and his powers were. He knew he took the people out of Egypt. He knew he led, the people through 40 years. I mean, he knew all that. He was not a dummy. But on the other hand, he was humble. I mean, he says one time when someone's complaining about him, he says, I didn't even ask for reimbursement of my donkey when I came from Midian to return to Egypt. It's just putting the mission first. Yeah. And the other compliment that he gets in the Bible is that he was a servant of the people. He was a servant of God. Yeah. And so he put himself again second. And I think that's important in building a business, is that putting your own ego second to the success of the business. I had one mentor, Dan Carney, at Solomon Brothers, who used to say that there's no limit to how high a group can soar if no one cares who gets the credit. Yeah, yeah. And so if you listen to me talk, and we had enough time, I'd spend time talking about Joe DiPaolo and John Tamberlane, who were the two other gentlemen who started the bank with me. We would have been a failure if I wouldn't have had two partners, because there's so much stuff that I can't do and I'm not good at. Yeah. And I suspect that they would say that the bank also wouldn't have worked if it wouldn't have been the three of us. And so it's always about the team. It's always about knowing you're not a genius. Yeah. And recognizing that we all have to make decisions, yeah. But we shouldn't flatter ourselves to say, we know it. I know it. Not we know it. I know it. So that I don't need to consult. So humility, understanding we need people around us that complement our skill set, and that ability to collaborate, to drive to get a greater sum than what three good individuals can put together themselves. So leadership of today, humility, collaboration. That's excellent. How do you deal, Scott, with the inevitable troughs that happen in the business world? So we have our peaks, we have our troughs. How do you deal with the days that aren't going as well as what we would have liked them to go? Well, this is turning out to be, in a way, I'm remembering more stories of my father, but I have to tell you this. Yeah. When I was young, and my father, and I would have a bad, I don't know, I do poorly on a test. I don't know, some bad thing was something that seemed really bad at the time would happen. My father would look at me and he would say, this isn't the concentration camps.
Oh, wow.
And,
yeah.
Like, what can you say after that? Really, we have food, we have water, we have, a shelter. We have so many things to be grateful for.
Yeah.
That I can get upset. And I'm I'm a human being. I get upset over things. I'm angry at myself or at others.
Yeah.
But we are so blessed. I mean, you're living in Brisbane. It doesn't get any better than that.
So putting whatever it is that we're going through into some sort of context helps you channel through some of those down days. So
yes.
Yeah. I've got a friend of mine who calls it the calamity scale. He starts with a scale of 1 to 10. He said, so always think about it as a calamity scale. So if number 10 is you're facing impending death and number 1 is the milk's gone off in the fridge, where does the crisis that you're facing really fit? And for most people, it's a 2 or a 3. And then when we put it into that sort of context, it gives them that perspective that enables them to say, well, what I'm making a big deal about isn't really a big deal. So that's excellent. So what about your relationship with failure?
Well, you have to be prepared to fail.
Yeah.
And there's no question. I've had investments, business deals, and not the trick, but the thing I try to do is learn from them.
Yeah.
And there were a few times where I thought, what, I did this right. It was just a meteorite hitting. There was nothing to do about it. But on reflection later, I realized, it might have been a meteor, but I should have gotten out of the way. I should have recognized meteorites can fall.
Yeah.
Maybe I should have gotten inside. And so I think the trick is to learn from every failure.
Yeah.
Because there will be, if you bet 70, if you do well 70% and get 70% of the decisions right, you're going to make a fortune.
Yeah.
You're going to do well. Your business or your career is going to succeed. But if you, things are going to be bad at a certain time, and we can all either focus on how did this happen to me, who's to blame, or what am I going to do with this? How am I going to go forward? One's past looking and one's forward looking. What am I going to do with this to move forward? And I would say that's really the key. And it's not only the key in business, it's the key to life. I mean, either we can wallow in all the things that went wrong, or figure out how we move on from here and where we can go from here. It's not always so easy.
Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that, but again, I take my father as a paradigm for that. I mean, the Holocaust, it doesn't get worse than that. He could have spent his life being angry at the world and you know what? He would have been right.
Yeah.
The world let it happen, and and his neighbors and everything, they let it happen. He would have been totally right. Or he could have moved on and figured out, okay, how am I going to rebuild my life? Yeah.
I think some of those stories of the survivors out of that particular regime are really inspiring, and I find that they approach life in a really positive sense, that let's make the most of what they've got, and I really do appreciate those stories that you're sharing in and around your father, because it's certainly giving me some amazing insight of what you've witnessed as you've been growing up. So now you've written a couple of books, but I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. What are you currently reading?
What am I currently reading? I'm reading a book called, I'm reading a couple of things. I'm reading a book, Woe to the Pharisees and the Scribes, which is a book about someone who's in a Bible translating committee. It's sort of up my alley. Yeah. I'm reading, what else am I reading? I'm reading, I'm actually, so here's the truth. I've just started, and I haven't actually admitted this publicly. I'm starting to work on my third book.
Okay.
So I've been writing and I've been reading and writing somewhat more research oriented papers. I'm just starting to read for review. An interesting book that actually some of your readers will be interested in. It's coming out June 30th, but I have a review copy because I do review books from time to time for a couple of publications here. But it's called You Will Be Assimilated. It's by David Gordon, and it's about China. And it's a fascinating book. So that's actually what I'm reading right now because I'm going to be writing a review for it shortly. And China's use of soft power, how the Chinese Communist Party approaches challenges. I think it's a fantastic book. I'll, of course, when I write my review, I'll have some quibbles like you have to when you write a review, but generally I'm enjoying it very, very much right now.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about your book because your latest book, it's called In Good Faith, Questioning Religion and Atheism. What compelled you to write that? I know that in today's world, it seems to be very binary. You're either got faith or you don't have faith, or you're an atheist or you're an activist. Or what compelled you to? Because your book, sort of looking at it, it seems to be bridging the gap or attempting to bridge the gap. So tell me about your book and what the compelling reason why you got behind it.
Well, you're right. People have been surprised in a way that I wrote a book on that. When people would ask me, well, they assumed when I wrote a book it was on a management book or something like that, a business book. But what happened was people know I'm a believer, and I'm chairman of a bank, and I was amazed at how many people were asking me questions like, well, Scott, I know you're a believer, but isn't God sort of like the believing in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny? And then other people would say to me things like, well, I believe in God. I'm like you. I believe in God, but it's not really rational. I mean, I have to park my brain at the doorstep when I enter a church or a synagogue. And I was actually amazed at how many people were having giving me these questions, and they were telling me because their kids, they were reading Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, or Samuel Harris's Letter to a Christian Nation, or Christopher Hitchens' Why God Isn't Great, etc. Yeah. And I really wanted to write a book because I believe that there's no reason to park our brains at the door, and that actually the Bible has some great lessons, whether you're a believer or not. Yeah. So I wanted to write a book about why it's rational to believe in God with all we know about science and the historicity of the Bible and our sense of modern morality, and why it's relevant today, why the Bible is more relevant than ever today. So I didn't want this to just be a Jewish book. I spoke to our local cardinal. I spent a good chunk of time with him. I spoke to bishops. I spoke to reverends, pastors, imams, etc. And I interviewed them because I wanted this to be a book about how faith is relevant today and why it makes sense and why we don't have to park our brains at the door. And the other thing I wanted to do, because I think there's a false contest to a certain degree between atheists and believers, in the sense that if you boil the whole Bible down, Hillel, who was an ancient Jewish sage, was asked, what's the lesson in the Bible while I'm on one foot? Tell me the whole thing. And he said, don't treat someone else the way you wouldn't want to be treated. The rest is commentary. Go learn it. It's the golden rule, but it's stated in the negative. And you know what? That has just to bridge the business and the faith side to me. So when we, as a bank, had to put into place our standards of conduct, we're a bank, so we have to have this big, thick document that people have to sign. I personally went to the beginning and I said, look, I wrote it. It's in bold, actually. Yeah. This is our standards of conduct. But if you remember one thing, you'll be okay. Don't treat your colleagues, your clients, your counterparties, or anyone you come in contact with the bank in a way you wouldn't want to be treated. The rest of this document is very long, but you have to read it. and you know what? That got us through a lot of stuff because when people start to think about ethics in this really detailed way, article section, subsection 6, subsection 3, little I in the little I4, they come up to, they try to work their way around it. They try to meander their way around it. But if you think, would I really want someone to do this to me? Now, look, we have to turn people down for loans. But you can do it in a humane way. You can do it in a way where you aren't abusive. Yeah. And the commonality between treating someone else the way you would want to be treated is important on a macro basis and on a micro basis. I mean, if you look at how Harvey Weinstein, I'm sure you've heard of him, and Charlie Rose and Matt Lauer and all sorts of people in the United States got caught up in really seriously abusing people. If they had just asked themselves the question, would I want someone to do that to me? Yeah. It would change the whole thing. Not, well, what is the conflict of interest, manual say? Does it really cover this? Well, that's not the right way to think. And so importantly for me is trying to bridge belief and faith and morality and ethics with operating where the rubber meets the road, which is business. Yeah. Yeah. And that golden rule is really quite, it's common. I mean, you listen to any of the atheist channels, for example, Scott, and they talk about humanity, and they've got a belief in humanity and treating everyone with respect. And that aligns in with the golden rule. So, I can see and understand how that concept can bridge the divide. So, and ultimately, maybe it's not even about necessarily the fact that, to push either side. It's that whole concept of, well, the golden rule is the bridge potentially. And if we all treat each other like the way that we would like to be treated, we're going to see a much better society. So, and look, we would treat that. I think that has implications to business. I mean, companies that are, would I want my data to be used the way XYZ is using my data? Would I want that personally? Think about it for a minute. If you think, well, we know better, it's really self-deification. Yeah. And that's the Bible, if it has one lesson, is don't self-deify. Pharaoh self-deified. A lot of people self-deified. But once you do that, that's when you get into a whole lot of trouble. That's when you think it's not that you're the genius, but you have the super authority or super power. Yeah. And again, it's about that humility that we talked about. That was Moses's. If he had a superpower, it was that he was humble. Absolutely. We've also got a golden rule for the Today's Leader podcast, and it's probably stated a little bit differently to your golden rule, but it's simply don't be an a-hole. So I think it really does align very similar, because I think if people do not actually keep in mind how they want other people to feel and how they want to be treated. I find it interesting that we've got to create legislation or regulations or any sorts of documents that detail how people should behave. And funnily enough, in the world of today, and this is one of the challenges for leaders of today, is we can legislate for almost anything. But what we can't legislate is the way some people think and act and behave. So ultimately, you could actually go through and follow a set of guidelines and give yourself a tick that you're acting with integrity and ethics. But funnily enough, providing an attitude internally that's looking for what's in it for me scenario. So I think if we can simplify something, whether it's don't be an a-hole or the golden rule as you've prescribed, I think that's going to stand everyone in great stead. Instead of having to follow and be compliant, we're actually looking at it from a different source, a different sense. So I think it's a great summary. What has been the impact on your book from, say, the atheist community? Have they responded? Have they reached out? Have they looked at it with different eyes? Or have they taken the binary approach and said, oh, it mentions the G word, we're not staying there? So that's a really good question. So I made a point And if you look at the blurbs or, the recommendations on the back and the like on the book, I really reached out to a few atheists. When I was writing it, I spoke to some atheist thinkers and the like, and I cite all of that in the book. And I think there are two types of atheists in the world, I've learned. There's the golden rule atheists who treat people with compassion and recognize their own humility. And then there's sort of the idolatrous atheists. And those are people who believe in they don't call it God, no way, but it's an ideology or a movement or I don't want to say party line, but it's something that they essentially deify that does have super authority over them. And those people hate my book. The golden rule atheists really are ready to sit down and talk. They may disagree. I've had some great conversations. It's very hard. One of the things that I don't try to do, and I say this in the book, I say it's rational to believe in God and it's rational not to believe in God. I think there's more evidence for God than for not being a God. And we could spend a long time talking about that. I think I believe that that's true. But no question, both are rational. You can never prove God and you can never disprove God. So I never try to convince someone or to convert someone because, frankly, the emotional, intellectual stakes are too high usually on both sides. Yeah. So I just want to have that conversation about the golden rule. But if you ever start calling someone out, and by the way, there are plenty of believers who are really idolaters too. Yeah. And, who deify things that don't make any sense in religion. And once you start calling anyone out on that, even in a gentle way, people react pretty vociferously negatively. Yeah. And I found that so I've been on some podcasts where the person starts out by saying, I'm not a believer. I don't believe. And I can have as part of this book tour, I can have a perfectly good hour chat with them. Yeah. And then I've been on, there's some people who just are, if you say anything about God, they start taking out garlic and saying, you're trying to convert me, you're trying to do this, you're trying to do that. And I'm just talking to you. Yeah. Yeah. It's a phenomenon that we've got at the moment is that people aren't having the conversations that they should have. So if we can't have a conversation around the concepts that you've got in your book and why you've written the book and the belief behind the book and potentially the building of society aspects in and around the golden rule, what can we talk about? I mean, we're seeing how conversation has changed into the need that people are feeling to act incredibly extreme, incredibly as an activist or whatever way you want to describe it, because they feel they're not having those conversations. But the funny thing is, when people try to have some conversations with some of those people, those conversations aren't happening either because it becomes like a violent sort of a discussion. So I think conversation is so incredibly important, and it's one of those skill sets that we are actually missing in the world, and that we do have to start teaching some of our younger people how to listen and how to have a conversation and how to treat people with respect while we're having that conversation, because it's through conversation that we're going to change mindset and we're going to change attitudes. So one thing that I've always found fascinating in the Bible, it's in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. It's essentially the golden rule, love your neighbors yourself. What's interesting is the verse before that. 19:17, Leviticus 19:17, which just says, you shall rebuke, it's a complicated Hebrew word, rebuke, engage, debate your neighbor. Don't hate your neighbor. Yeah. Or else their sin comes upon you. And the interesting thing is, in order to really believe in the golden rule, not deify yourself, actually accept and worry about the other person, first you have to engage with them, debate them, rebuke them, have an argument with them. Don't cancel them. Don't erase them. Don't say, you know what, don't talk to me. I don't know if you have the mini, don't talk to me, talk to the arm, because I'm not listening type of thing.
Yeah.
If the whole thing that we're missing, and I think it really pointed this, but this was known 3,000 years ago. If you don't actually talk to people in a real serious way and engage them, then you can't have the golden rule, and then they become something that just needs to be demolished, or they're demonized or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's an important lesson. That's why I think, look, I tell people, and I've said this on book tour, is I think the less people know about the Bible, the less they like it. And that was one of the reasons I wrote the book, because there's a lot of stuff in there that's extremely applicable to our modern era. Yeah,
absolutely. I've got a very simple saying that I trot out every now and again. It's a really simple one. It's insults don't influence. And that's where we play the person and not the idea. And it just gets easier when we get challenged with an idea to call them a redneck or a racist or whatever's going to be the name. Because that makes us feel better, because we can't respond in a positive way in the conversation. So, but insults have never influenced people. We influence people through trust and respect, which is usually the best way. So if we can have conversations with trust and respect, people are going to listen. So we seem to be missing that. So
sadly, very sadly, we're missing that. I know we are in the United States these days, where we've become so tribalized that it's one of the things I'm thinking about a lot.
Yeah. So what's the vision for you going forward now, Scott? What does it look like?
Well, we're living in a strange time, in a COVID time. We've had, it's hard to look out without having some sense or making some assumption about what's going to happen with COVID. If we're going to live with this more or less forever. You folks in Australia have been very lucky. You were able to shut down and essentially more or less suppress the disease.
Yeah.
And we in the United States today, this will be whenever this is, we've been growing COVID here 9% a day, 54% just yesterday. We may be back into a serious second wave. So what happens business-wise? Honestly, when this first started and we had to move into the business essentially to be primarily remote, I was working 24/6. I wasn't working 24/7 because I still have the Sabbath, but I was working 24/6. That's for sure. Into the wee hours. And so I'm pretty much have been, I don't want to say consumed, but I've been super duper focused on the on getting and helping to navigate, being part of the team that navigates Signature from here to there. And interestingly, just like '08, this is turning out to be a time when clients really value a safe bank. So we announced, we were at a conference, so I can say this on your show publicly, even before earnings come out. Our average deposits have grown more than $5 billion just from the beginning of April. April, May, and we're just about at the end of June. Because people are looking. So I've been inundated. I've had conference calls and client calls with people at 9 o'clock at night, at 11 o'clock at night, who are trying to figure out their business. Where are they going? And of course, we're trying to do the same thing. So I haven't been able to I've had to step back. I haven't been able to think long term because, and I don't, I guess I'm admitting that is that I'm trying to think over the next months as opposed to over the next years. And I'm hoping that I can get to the point soon where I can go back to thinking in terms of years and not months.
Yeah, it certainly has had an impact of narrowing our focus and really shortening our time span. So you've accomplished quite a lot. So what are you most proud of in terms of your accomplishments?
Oh, my family.
Yeah.
I'm blessed to be married to a brilliant woman Susan, who we've been just celebrated our 35th anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And 4 wonderful children. Who are 31 to 22.
Yeah.
And they're all doing amazing things. And the first thing and the most important thing to me is I'm just so proud of my family. And I am proud of the business and what we've accomplished, and that we built this bank from scratch to being a top bank in the United States, and that we're helping people. I mean, I'm very proud of that. And you know, but it wasn't only me. I recognize that too.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy. The other thing I am happy about and proud of is that my two partners, we've stayed friends and partners. And, you know, not every day is a good day.
Yeah.
And my first business partner, Lou Ranieri, I told you I started it during Liar's Poker era. I spoke to Lou today. He's literally one of my closest friends in the world.
Excellent.
And, you know, we've done business together since the 80s.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of that I've had these long-term enduring relationships.
Yeah, and that is something to be proud of, and also probably a walking epitome of the golden rule that you've spoken of. So an example, that's awesome. So time to a couple of last questions. Is there anything that I haven't asked you yet? So this is your chance to jump up on your soapbox and spruik it. So you've talked about your third book that you're starting to work on already. But is there anything that you want to share with the listeners now?
Sure. Well, I'd love people to know, first of all, I do write not just on books, but I write op-eds and all sorts of things. I write for, I've got a website, Scott Shay, SCOTTSHAY.com. And you can read what I write about there. In Good Faith is available all over, but in this time of COVID, it's on Kindle, it's on Audible. The guy who reads it got great. You know, people love listening to him if you're an Audible reader. Yeah. Andrew Totlis, he's great. He's done a lot of great books, and I was really happy that the publisher got him for me. And I'm really happy to announce this week, just 1 day ago, the book came out in paperback. So it's had 2 hardcover printings, and now it's out in paperback. So the book has been doing well. I've been doing sort of, with COVID, I shifted to a podcast book tour. So that's been fun, and I actually enjoy it better because the conversations are longer than when you're on a television segment and you have 3 minutes to sort of like show and glow. And the other thing that I would say that I'm doing, I mean, I'm writing a fair amount, and I've been paying attention to China lately. I told you I was writing a book, and I'm write from time to time for Asia Times. Yeah. Because I think right now, and I'm telling this to, you know, us Americans who are very, you know, North American centric focused, is that, I've said this so many times, that you may not care about Asia, but Asia cares about you. Yeah. And so I've been very involved with Asia Times. I've been writing about them. I've been writing about Hong Kong. I've been thinking about Hong Kong. And what that means, because I think it's a major moment in the world right now, and COVID is camouflaging that. And I think your country Australia is clearly learning that the Chinese Communist Party is flexing its muscles, and we're at a precipitous time. So I'm doing a lot with Asia Times.
Yeah, it is quite worrying in so many aspects. What COVID has done here in Australia is really refocused everyone on our own manufacturing and offshore manufacturing in general. But with that, we're seeing certainly some retribution of some description or some bullying activities that can be perceived as bullying activities anyway. So it is very interesting times, and quite worrying for a number of people as well. So let's hope that we navigate them and come out of it as best as what we can. And the interesting thing I see with COVID, especially in regards to the United States, is that we've got Melbourne in Victoria is probably what we call our little hotspot at the moment. And there's been a lot said that over the last, say, week, they've had increases of new cases by double digits. So, you know, wow. 19 or 20 double digits. That's our hotspot. Wow. So here in Queensland, we've had the last 7 days, we've had no new active cases. So, but then I look over in the States and I see still the increases on a daily basis there in New York and some of those real hotspots. And I just, Brazil's a real worry at the moment in relation to it. So I hope that we can all just navigate and we just work through this. So I think it's going to be with us for a while, Scott. So
sadly, I think it's going to be with us. And what's happening is, because it's with us, bad folks know they can get away with a lot right now.
Yeah.
And they are.
Yeah.
And it's going to be on us and the rest of the people, because, you know, it's always the real complicity is silence, and the real complicity is not acting. And it's going to be hard. I mean, and China in particular. Look, I wrote that I've written one article that truly went viral. In Asia. It was in Asia Times, called The Hong Kong Protests, It's Monotheism Stupid. Yeah. And I ended up getting tweeted by some of the leaders in the movements, in the pro-democracy movement and the like. And I couldn't believe that, you know, clearly some folks, I assume, you know, purported by the CCP, started writing all these comments that, you know, and started really like writing stuff that I was stunned to read about.
Yeah.
And they're paying attention.
Yeah.
They're paying attention, and they're trying to stifle dissent. And you're in that neighborhood.
We know. So we'll, you know, that comment, silence, don't be silent. So I think Australians are really wising up to it. So, you know, we can just hope that we're on the right path. Scott, it's been I'm very conscious of the time. I know you've got a pressing engagement in just another couple of minutes. So I really do thank you for your time. I hope you've enjoyed being on today's Leader Podcast. Apart from scottshay.com, how else can people connect with you?
Well, at scottshay.com, there's a contact form if someone wants to connect with me. Sometimes people do for podcasts and for other events, and you can read everything that I've written on there. And I have a newsletter, so scottshay.com is really the best way to connect with me.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Scott. Have yourself a wonderful evening, and all the best for the future.
Thank you. You too, Tony. It's really been a pleasure.
Thanks, Scott. That was an enthralling conversation, and I'm hoping that you found the conversation as beneficial as I did. One of the compelling points was the stories from Scott around his father. I particularly took away the fact that his father had every reason to be angry at the world due to what had occurred during the Holocaust. But Scott's father chose to live a life of gratitude. He grabbed opportunities and he worked to fulfill potential. And it certainly wasn't easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. And as John Maxwell says, everything worthwhile is uphill. We have to work for it. And don't stand around with your hand out waiting for things. So, and it was interesting to see Scott's compelling nature to start the business, the bank from scratch, and maybe that was part of the observations, the experiences that he saw with his own dad. Absolutely compelling story. And how about building a bank from scratch? I mean, how do you go about that? I'm just sitting here in awe thinking about that. And then seeing it evolve to be one of the top 20 banks in America, that's a great story. And again, what really struck me was the focus on culture. And these case studies on great culture continue. Now, if you want to build a great company, part of the process is obviously to have a clear indicator of the performance culture that you would like to build. So what does your team look like? What does your ideal team look like? And do you have a committed approach to getting the team that you want? Because we keep seeing these case studies, these success stories of businesses that, not by default, not by luck, have a great culture, and it's by design and it's by intention. Now, I have to say there's real power in conversation. Now, as a person that sits outside of the binary descriptions of believer and atheist, I was actually really looking forward to this conversation. Nervously looking forward to this conversation. Looking forward to this conversation nervously. And as I said, I would probably lean to the non-faith side more than the faith side. And this may seem strange for people who know that I'm a certified John Maxwell coach. But then the other side is that I listen to a wide variety of thought leaders, and I listen to a wide variety of podcasts. And the podcasts of Sam Harris and the podcasts of the Thinking Atheist are actually part of my podcast list. So I'm sitting in this space. I'm not necessarily a believer, and I'm not necessarily an atheist, but I enjoy the conversation. I enjoy listening to the conversation. I enjoy learning more. And the reality is that no matter what your perspective of way of thinking is, respectful conversation helps find common ground. So the reality is, I'll just repeat that, the reality is that no matter what your perspective or your way of thinking, respectful conversation helps find common ground. And as you learnt during the conversation, there's commonalities in approach. Now, Scott's got a golden rule. It's behaviour-based, and it's really driven by a real underlying of do unto others as what you would want done to yourself. It's a real basic common sense rule. And the golden rule is based around that. And you see that permeating right through the Signature Bank, through their ways of working with each other. And it's something that Scott actually holds incredibly dear to himself, his golden rule. It also lines up firmly with my golden rule, and hopefully you know what that is, but the golden rule is simply just don't be an arsehole. And I think that when we can find common ground through respectful conversation, ultimately you can see that people with differing mindsets or thoughts can actually hold a respectful conversation and instigate and initiate change. So I hope you took away some gold from the conversation. And again, thank you very much to Scott for openly sharing his story and his philosophy. I certainly took a lot away from it. I was energized during the course of the day after that particular interview, and it's phenomenal what good conversation can really do. Now, as we know, in today's disruptive world, good leadership skills will always stand you in good stead. Now, if you're looking to build better leadership skills, consider our sponsors, Think and Grow Business and the Coach Curl Academy. Think and Grow Business, the home of the Think and Grow Business Mastermind, where we focus on personal, professional and business growth. Check it out or book in for a free 30-minute discovery session at thinkandgrowbusiness.com.au. The Coach Curl Academy has now over 78 programs that helps build a better you. And you can join for just $1 for the first month. The academy that equips you and enhances your mindset, your leadership and your business. And that's all available for you right now at thecoachcurlacademy.com. Don't forget, you are standing stronger, braver and wiser. Don't ever forget the golden rule. You know what it is. Just don't be an arsehole. This is Coach Cole signing off. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.